This is Need to Know. News, context, and analysis about anomalous phenomena. Here's some real talk from two authors who literally wrote the book on disclosure. From New York, Richard Dolan. From Los Angeles, Bryce Zabel. Let's get started.
Hey, Rich, how you doing?
Hey, Bryce. I'm glad to be back here with you again for another Need to Know.
But I keep reading, I follow the news and I follow the weather, and it seems like you guys are always digging out from snow. What do you got right now?
It's kind of true. So I'm up in the Rochester, New York area. I'm actually in a little suburb of Rochester. And today we've had a lot of sunshine, but it's great. A crazy thing. Like we had sunshine with a little bit of a drizzle of snow. But then the snow melted and it's just brisk, but nice. But like the last 2 days, we had high winds and snow. But then a few days before that, it was balmy, summery. Like the birds and the little critters are getting a little, they deal with this every year. But it's a confusing time for nature lovers. But you never know.
This is the time of year. I have two endangered desert tortoises. I don't think they're endangered anymore, but I have two desert tortoises, and we always put them into hibernation in a cardboard box on Halloween, and then we always take them out on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, because we're not smart enough to figure out the calendar to figure out what we should really do. So that makes it simple for us. So this year I was going, well, is it too cold to bring them out? Because it was cold. And then when I finally brought them out, it was 94 degrees out. So they're nice.
Warm enough for them.
Yeah, they're warm enough. I was driving my car in the other day. My car said it was 98 degrees. It's a tale of two cities here, my friend, between us on the weather. So, hey, listen, did you see Project Hail Mary yet? Have you seen it?
No. In fact, I didn't really even know about it until today. So I'm a little out of it.
Well, that's okay. You're the guy in the suburb of Rochester, and I'm the guy that's in the suburb of Hollywood. So I guess that's okay. But I tell you,
I do understand it's very popular, and it's about humans and aliens, and it's pretty cool.
I just saw it last night. Went with my wife to see it, and I thought it was a wonderful film. It's, the book that it's based on is written by Andy Weir, who is the same guy that, of course, wrote The Martian. And in fact, it's kind of funny. I'm not going to put any spoilers out here, but just as a person that, writes movies for a living and television series, it's all about structure. The structure of Project Hail Mary is damn near the structure of The Martian. I mean, it's one guy out there all on his own, having to, as Matt Damon said in The Martian, when he gets stranded on Mars, he goes, I'm going to have to science the shit out of this, which is sort of what Ryan Gosling has to do in this movie. It's a fine movie, and other people will have reviewed it. I'll tell you, though, here's my hot take. I'm sitting there in the theater watching it, and, because I've been working on this other podcast, Soundlight and Frequency, about UFOs and movies and that kind of thing. I think about these things, and obviously, there have been a whole ton of movies made over the years that are alien invasion movies or TV series. I've made my share, so I know what that's like, because it's conflict and all that. But as I was watching it, and I'm curious if you think that even this supposition is correct. I happen to believe that there is a very good chance that a non-human AI has been observing our planet for a very long time, at least since the 40s. And that I always say they must know almost everything about us, because our digital signature is leaking out constantly. And, it's pretty easy to track what humans have on their minds by our media and so forth. And yet we know very little about them. And I was just thinking to myself, one of the things that they would think if they watched our cultural content on the subject of aliens, quite often they would see that we portray aliens as negative and hostile, obviously. And what I thought was interesting, if there is an AI watching and scooping up all this cultural content that we put out there, one of the things that just scooped up is the most popular movie in the world right now is a movie that says, an alien and a human could work together for a common cause. So I thought, well, maybe that's an item of hope. I don't know. What's your take? What's your take on this AI thing?
Well, it's. I'm glad you mentioned alien AI, because that's kind of been my governing assumption for a long time about what this is. I even like more than 20 years ago, 2003, 2004. I remember thinking long and hard about the likelihood that any kind of alien intelligence that was here was very likely one of exceptional artificial intelligence.
Right.
That would had to be the way to go. I had been reading a lot of Ray Kurzweil by then, and I was very influenced by that. And I still think, now more than ever do I think that. So
has your mind ever wandered and asked, if they have an advanced AI, is their AI bypassing us and chatting with our AI? Or is that something that could be a real possibility someday?
Oh, I think that could be a possibility someday. Yeah, I do. Because I don't think they're, I've believed this for a while too. I don't really think that they are likely to want to communicate with us. Not because they look down on us or anything like that, but like we don't operate on their level. It would be like go back 100,000 years and observe earlier Homo sapiens. People who, anatomically just like us, brains just like us, but without the software, without all the software that we have. You look at it that way. And we would be studying them and watching their level. Like we'd be thinking, okay, when are they going to get some complex recursive language? Are they there yet? How complex are their social interactions, their society? Are they able to teach certain skills that get passed down generation to generation? How well do they do that? When are they likely to start coalescing into larger groups and forming complex hierarchies? Like that's the kind of thing that we would probably be looking at. And I suspect that's what they are doing with us. Like they're looking at us at our level of complexity now that we have achieved. And I'm assuming that they have achieved some critical levels of complexity that we have not achieved, simply because they have been able to come here, presumably, from wherever they come from, and we don't know how to do that. So they've figured something out that we have not figured out. And so that's probably an important leap. And I suspect that they are observing and watching and maybe testing from time to time to see where we are at in that whole scheme of things. And my guess is that we still have quite a way to go.
That makes
before
good
we can
sense.
actually deal with them.
You probably know the name of it. I'm blanking myself right now, but when Lou Elizondo was interviewed when he was first coming out, and he was being he's always been a little evasive, of course, but for reasons that he has explained. But he, in several interviews, said, well, if you kind of want to know what's going on or what might be going on, there's a book, and it was a short story and something about the sea or something. I read it actually at the time, and now my brain has lost most of it. But the concept was that the NHI wasn't talking to us because it didn't consider us the top life form. It was talking, I'm going to say the wrong animal, but it was talking to dolphins instead of us. And I thought, well, first of all, that's an interesting sci-fi concept. But for Lou Elizondo to throw it around as something that I should go read if I want to understand what's really going on. I mean, have you ever, do you know what I'm talking about? The book, the short story?
I've heard him mention this, but I've not read the book.
Yeah. So that actually could make some sense. Although if you were an advanced NHI and you came to Earth, you'd at least say the humans were the ones you have to deal with because they're everywhere.
The humans are absolutely, yeah. We are the ones that have to be watched because we are the ones that have transformed the planet.
Absolutely.
Dolphins have not transformed the planet, but we have. And I mean, we're scaling our capabilities. The thing that we've done that any aliens have also done is that we have learned that we've kind of like unlocked the secret, like the Greek god Prometheus gives fire to mankind, the gift of the gods. The fire of Prometheus is basically the ability to think abstractly and use things like mathematics and symbolic information to manipulate our world. And we're great at that. So we figured this out. And it's developed a kind of loop where we've obtained ever greater amounts of power over our environment and over other animal species, over plant species. So we just dominate the planet now. So, and, you know, I mean, as intelligent as dolphins and whales are, they don't do advanced mathematics. They don't leave footprints on the moon. That's what we do. So we're clearly going to be of more earth-changing significance, and on a planet as I'll just say unique and precious as Earth, which I'm sure is one thing that's drawn them. That, you know, we are the species that they have to watch out for because we're observant. We see everything, and I can't imagine them thinking that they can just interact with us without us just totally spazzing out. Which I think we would.
That makes pretty good sense because, I mean, the truth is, even if dolphins are wonderfully intelligent and good friends to make, they're not in danger of destroying the planet. The planet is not being overrun by dolphins who are building nuclear weapons currently. So
no, and I mean, they don't.
You would definitely have to talk to us.
Yeah, they don't organize their society hierarchically with, you know, with jobs, specific jobs and roles that, you know, they undertake in order to increase their social power within the oceans. Like they don't do that. They have relationships. They're very intelligent, but they don't do no other society really, no other creatures on Earth do what we do. So, and that's because we basically discovered how to do this, you know, in our evolutionary path. And so no, I think any intelligence that's here, they would be interested in dolphins. They would be interested in whales and octopuses and other intelligent creatures on this planet, crows and dogs and cats. But I think humans are the one that they really have to watch most carefully because we have created this very, very complex human system, which is called civilization, that is very powerful and also very fragile at the same time. It's very brittle. And we're not going to get into the whole all the details of the current war in Iran, but it is worth just pointing out that if you step back from an alien point of view and look at this war, you might not see ideology. You might not see who's right and who's wrong in your opinion. What you might see is this complex human system under a point of very specific stress to probably its most sensitive node, which is the Persian Gulf, where you have energy flows, you've got military weapon systems, naval power, everything's concentrated here. Agriculture is dependent on this. So it's a systemic stress point that is essentially a test of the civilization to see whether how well it can adapt to a major crisis at its most sensitive stress point.
I know all rules of podcasting would involve me responding to that, but I'm afraid I'll just go down some alleyway that will lead us into a lot of comments. But I was thinking when we were sort of throwing dolphins around for a moment, I thought to myself, this is interesting because here's Richard Dolan, who's written already one book about unidentified submerged objects with a couple more on the way. But
the second one's done.
The second one's done. Fantastic. There's breaking news, folks. Number 2 is done. You also wrote a book, which I read a few years ago, where you were sort of talking about who might be going there, right? I forget the name of your book, but you were talking about what the different kinds of so-called aliens or whatever.
Oh, the alien agendas.
Yeah. Okay. So here is my question. My mind was just drifting off during that when I was thinking about this, and I thought, Rich, given that you've spent so much time understanding USOs, and you've also spent time trying to comprehend and organize and categorize who might be going there in our world right now, how does that apply to water? Who do you think is underwater? Do you have a theory about what these these USOs seem to be technological, some of them. Who's down there and who's running these?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that question. Like, who? Is it gray aliens? Is it human-looking beings? I will say, when I look at the few accounts that USO witnesses have had where they have claimed to have seen a being in connection with this, frequently those beings look human. So go figure. It's one of those weird things, like when I first started studying UFOs more than 30 years ago, I shied away from all those accounts where people would claim to have seen human-looking operators of these craft. I just thought, that's insane. Why would you have operators of flying saucers from another planet looking totally human? But the fact is, that's a very large subset of witness accounts of UFOs and USOs. But really, the more interesting question to me isn't who are they, but why are they there? Because there's definitely someone down there in the oceans,
right? And
they exist in certain areas that I think are really safe for them, whether in deep trenches like the Puerto Rico Trench, which I think they are at. There's been talk lately about off the coast of California by Catalina Island, in fact, big USO hotspot, of course, of caverns down that way where they might very well exist. I think that's entirely feasible. The thing is, being in the oceans, if you're them, makes a lot of sense, because you want to be able to observe, study this planet. This planet would be worth studying. Like, for any visitor from anywhere else, you would clearly want to study many, many things about Earth. We have an incredible ecosystem. We have all this interesting kind of weather and climate. It is a fascinating world on its own merits. But then you've got these pesky humans who are in the midst of a scientific, technological, ongoing series of revolutions that's been going for a few centuries now, where we have completely reinvented ourselves and transformed much of the world's ecosystems as well. And so you would know these humans, like, they'll notice us, like they'll see us flying around. So I really believe that they are kind of walking a line between not wanting to be seen at all and allowing themselves to be seen. I think they have a certain tolerance for letting themselves be seen under certain conditions, but by and large, not wanting to, because I think we would get in their way, and we would also be very much disrupted as a civilization by them. Like, we really overestimate our resilience in dealing with them, in my opinion. I mean, you go back 1,000 years, go back to the medieval time, and imagine a flying saucer lands there. Well, those people you would destroy medieval society. Like, they wouldn't be able to handle it psychologically.
Right.
But no, now we in the 21st century, we're just so much more psychologically prepared, are we? I don't really think so.
No.
I think that these other beings they probably mastered space and time in ways that we do not understand. So that means they understand causality totally differently than us. And they probably have, all signs point to some kind of hive mind capability. If that is true, they probably think 100 times faster than us. They have like this, group community that they probably deal with. I don't really think that we have the wherewithal psychologically or psychically to deal with it. We like to think we do. We like to tell ourselves a good story. But so I think they're probably aware of this. And I think their attitude is, don't step on the flowers here, because they're kind of delicate.
When you were mentioning Catalina Island as one of the places they might be hanging out, that's just a few miles from where I live. It's not that far away. People go there all the time. And I was thinking, I don't know if you're hurting or helping tourism by mentioning Catalina as a hotbed, because I don't know if there's UFO tourism, but a lot of people go to Roswell to just be in that place. So I imagine some people go to Catalina. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, what I was going to say as well was moving on to another topic is my buddy Brent Friedman made some news in the last 10 days that, let me put it this way. If it had been somebody else who I didn't know, I'd still be saying to you right now on Need to Know, what do we think about what this guy just said?
Yeah, we're talking about the Harrington story here.
Yeah, I am. I'm talking about the John Harrington story that was told by my friend Brent Friedman, who I co-created Dark Skies with. And for people to get kind of a baseline, John Harrington was the assistant undersecretary for the Navy in the first Reagan term. And he then became Secretary of Energy in the second term. So he was a pretty major guy. And Brent had a story that, frankly, I'm almost tired of hearing it and telling about it because I've had to talk about it a lot. But I'm sure you've heard Brent tell his story now. What's your thought? What do you want to know about it?
So, well, now correct me if I get any of this wrong.
Yeah,
I've heard this from you when we wrote about this when we did After Disclosure. And we've talked about it since then.
Sure.
And I listened to your podcast with Brent, and I mean, it was beautifully told by him. So Brent, as Bryce is saying, listeners, he was, I think, 18 years old in 1981. Yeah. He knew John Harrington. He was kind of like a mentor to him, I guess. Mm-hmm. And he's now in the Reagan administration. And so Brent arrives at Harrington's home in Virginia.
But and by the way, imagine being 18 years old and having a family friend that's gone to work in Washington, D.C., and you get a phone call from him, and he wants you to drive 2 of his cars stacked full of all his shit and drive it across the United States and deliver it to him. And you get to take your friends with you, and you're going to get paid for it. Brent was like, okay, this is pretty.
Hell yes, man. 18 years old. That's an awesome.
Doesn't get much better than that, but then it took a dark turn.
Well, yeah. So what's interesting, Brent and I are almost exactly the same age.
Ah, okay.
I was 19 in 1981. I remember that time period very, very well. And so I can absolutely identify with a lot of this story as he told it. But so it's really fascinating. Like he gets there and he sees Harrington. He's got like a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. So
yeah.
But like he notices his personal change. Like Harrington was like this very disciplined, kind of controlled man, but now he's like gained a little weight. He's strained. He was drinking, and this is new Reagan years. Like this is brand new stuff.
Brand new.
So then they talk privately, and you could really see there's like a kind of father-son kind of thing going on.
Very much.
Here.
I mean, that's the one thing that I think people absolutely need to understand when they hear this story. There is no doubt that Brent had a relationship with John Harrington. They were neighbors. Brent's mother was very good friends with Harrington's wife. They threw a birthday party for his wife.
Yeah.
Harrington, Brent's father was not the world's greatest father in terms of, he didn't teach his kid how to throw a football or a baseball, but Harrington did. So Harrington and Brent had this, at least mentor and maybe mentor plus kind of relationship.
There was clearly deep affection.
Yes.
And we can say a kind of love that they had. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair statement. So it makes the story even that much more poignant, like when I hear it. So but anyway, he sees that Harrington's gone through this change, and Harrington tells him privately that for several months he'd been taken to this underground facility in West Virginia for daily briefings, and that the experience affected him so deeply he cried himself to sleep at night. And then he said very carefully, non-human intelligences are real. They are here, and they are known within classified channels, I guess we could say, and that he had seen them. And I don't think he elaborated upon that. I think that's as far as he would go. Is that right?
I think that what it's sort of like I'm quoting Brent, but I've heard him say it. Everyone should know. I first heard this story in 1994, when Brent and I were first introduced by Brent's wife, who was working with me on a show I was doing. And Brent told me this story, and it's never changed over the years, Rich. The story that Brent told me then is the story he just told publicly now, and the story as I told it to you when you and I were working on AD After Disclosure. It's been remarkably consistent. And I think what Harrington said is that I think he called them aliens. I think non-human intelligence was not a phrase that was being bandied about by him, but I think he said they're aliens, and I've seen them. And the shocker, I mean, my jaw dropped when he told me this in 1994, when he said that Harrington had been briefed at this underground facility and cried himself to sleep at night. And Brent said, as anybody would say, as I would say, if you told me you were crying yourself to sleep at night, I'd go, my God, Rich, why? What's going on? And Harrington said, because I have 2 daughters, and this is the world they're going to grow up in, which is just a crazy thing to think about. And for years, I've been sort of looking for things that would clarify that Brent was telling the truth. I mean, I knew instinctively he's telling Brent's not a liar about anything. He just always tells the truth. He's a straight shooter, and he's been consistent on this story. So the question has always been like, what does this mean? If a guy is being briefed like that. And so I've been looking for what can I hang my hat on as something that really reaches into this story and says, yeah, that's the right thing. And it's the underground facility in West Virginia. And I'm sure you know about this one, but there is an underground facility in West Virginia that was not brought to the public's attention until, I believe, 1993 or something.
We're talking about Mount Weather?
It's the one under the Greenbrier Hotel, where they were going to put Congress. It's and you can go there to West Virginia right now, and you can actually take a tour of this place because it's decommissioned. But it was super, super secret, and Brent had never heard of it. I mean, how would he hear of it in 1981? Yeah. It wasn't even outed publicly until the mid-90s. So that makes me feel that it's something real. And so, Rich, by the way, one other thing, which is when David Grush was here practicing for his interview with Ross Coulthart for News Nation, he was downstairs in my, screening area where we watch movies and TV. And we were getting set to record him for a practice. And I said to him, do you know John Harrington? And Grush looks at me and says, I know John Harrington. And he didn't offer anything else. But not long ago, last year, I got a call from Ross Coulthart, who told me that Grush, who's working for the House Oversight Committee, wanted Ross to ask me to ask Brent if Brent would deliver Harrington via car to DC to testify before the House Oversight Committee. And I thought, that is the most ironic thing I've ever heard, that in 1981, Brent drives the guy's car to DC, and now in 2025, they want him to drive Harrington himself to DC. Anyway, it didn't happen, but those two things tell me Brent's not making this up. This is the real deal. Now, what do you know about Harrington that is more, I mean, what do you know about this guy?
I haven't really studied his career, so I would be at a real disadvantage there. But I will say the one other thing that I recall Brent saying in your interview, in your podcast with him, which, by the way, was really good. I got to congratulate you guys on that.
Oh, thanks.
But that Harrington described the system around all of this, and that the public, saying that the public is given a mixture of truth and disinformation deliberately to kind of keep the subject alive but confused, and that in his opinion, full disclosure could destabilize society, particularly the economic and cultural foundations. And so I thought that was, people can agree or not agree with that, but I thought it was significant that Harrington said that to Brent.
I mean, it is true that when you hear, and I urge people, who want to dig a little deeper, listen to Brent tell the story it's episode 4. It's called The Man Who Cried Himself to Sleep. Listen to Brent tell the story and you'll realize one thing. Brent is telling the story from direct experience. I mean, this is not a guy that wrote it down on a postcard or a Post-it and is now sort of vamping with it. He's been telling something that happened to him. And so it's, well, first of all, I'm just glad that Brent has finally come forth and told this whole story. For the longest time, he didn't want to, Rich, because his own mother said, "Oh, why do you have to go do that?" His mother didn't want him to do it. And so Brent had to make a decision. He had to say, look, am I going to add this to the dialogue or not? And I've always sort of hung on the side, but sort of argued for, yeah, you got to do this because you got to go on the record with this stuff. All of us who have a piece of this puzzle, Rich, have I don't know if it's a moral obligation or anything like that, but it is good for us to bear witness. I mean, how else do we move this thing forward? And granted, this is Brent's story about this guy, but if you give it credibility, then it really tells you that there is something really extreme that was going on. What is that? 45 years ago? Well,
has Brent talked to? Is Harrington still alive right now?
Yes, he is. So, I don't think he's in good health, but yeah,
I would not think so. But have he and Brent talked about this since then? Has Brent mentioned this?
No. A couple of things about that. Brent, when Dark Skies came out, this would have been 15 years after this time that he spoke with Harrington. Brent got a buck slip, which, for those of you, what is a buck slip? It's something like this. It's just a little card that you write, "Hey, great to see you," and put it in the mail, right? So Brent got one from John Harrington that said, "From the desk of John Harrington." And then he wrote, "I'm glad to see that you got your story. You finally got to tell your story." That's pretty crazy. I mean, that's pretty wild. And now, not long ago, Brent and I were being called by a reporter who wanted us to sort of go on the record. And we said, well, we're going to go on the record, but we don't want to do it in an interview with you. We want to lay the whole thing out at once so people can judge for themselves. And it came to pass, and I don't know if it's from this guy as a source or from someone from the House Oversight, but this guy, but apparently Harrington said, yeah, I don't really remember Brent very well. And Brent and I talked about that, and our thinking was what he should have said is, Brent was a nice young man. I knew him when he was growing up, and, he has an active imagination. That's what he probably should have said, because that's an interpretation, and it acknowledges that he knew him. But instead, he made it seem like I don't even really know this guy. Brent's got dozens of photos of him and Harrington, family photos. It's the world's worst attempt at, getting out of the story, because the very thing that he's saying is untrue. He's starting out with something that's untrue. But then again, I guess if Harrington's idea was, well, he told Brent, when Brent said in 1981, aren't you worried that I'll say something about this? And Harrington said, who's going to believe you? You're just a kid. And if you ever say anything, I'll just deny it. So
yeah, exactly.
Denying it.
That was easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Hey, speaking of military or the government, I guess, did we want to say a word about General William McCasland?
We sure do. Yeah, we can't solve the Harrington
about
thing.
This. Does anyone really know what actually is going on with him? I don't think so.
It's fascinating. I did find initially, and I found this very telling about the media though, Rich, when it first was reported, it got on my radar because I thought, okay, well, I know who he is. He was named in the Podesta mails, and Tom DeLonge said he knew him and all that stuff. So that was my first thought that made it interesting. But the media, the established media, was too busy covering Savannah Guthrie's mother's disappearance breathlessly, with day after day coverage. And along comes a guy who's highly classified, like McCasland. He disappears. And at the beginning, not so much coverage. It's getting a little more now because I think the Savannah Guthrie storyline has played itself out. And now there's McCasland. But the truth is, I don't know what the truth is. Do you have any suspicions?
I heard some speculations that he's believed to be alive and in hiding from elites, hiding from, dark elements within the government. I haven't really heard any genuine speculation or much less evidence that brings in the UFO part, which maybe we should just, I'm assuming many people are familiar with a UFO connection to McCasland, but basically, as you were referring
please, I think you should. Let's get that out there.
So this came out in 2016. So WikiLeaks released a series of emails of John Podesta. And John Podesta, of course, was Bill Clinton's chief of staff during the 90s. He did a lot of work for Barack Obama. John Podesta is a Washington power player, all right? Obviously, very high level. So Podesta had a bunch of emails. We have the thread appearing involving Tom DeLonge. Remember Tom DeLonge, Blink 182, To the Stars Academy. So DeLonge tells Podesta that he'd been working closely with a senior Air Force figure, General Neil McCasland. I kept saying William, Neil McCasland. And this is all in connection with like promoting UFO disclosure, essentially. So McCasland had run the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is exotic technology central, for the U.S. Air Force, including story after story of flying saucer technology. But so then, according to DeLonge, McCasland was not only aware of the reality of UFOs, but was helping him, or helping to, I guess, guide him maybe in putting together a team and maybe shaping what would eventually become a public disclosure effort. So McCasland was involved in that. And McCasland's position at Wright-Patterson was very significant. I mean, he's the Air Force Research Lab there. That's at the center of advanced aerospace and materials research, within the U.S. military system. So that's exactly the kind of institution that, we researchers in the field have believed intersects with all of the ET tech. So, and when you read the emails, which when they came out, I think we all studied them carefully. Mm-hmm. I really think McCasland was presented in a very powerful way in those, like direct knowledge of recovered alien tech, essentially, is how it was portrayed. And now, once those emails came out, McCasland, he was gone. They all the folks involved in those discussions with Podesta, they got out of Dodge, essentially. McCasland never publicly, at least, confirmed any of these claims by DeLonge, but you have to assume Tom DeLonge was telling the truth there.
Do you have any feelings about what really happened to him? Do you think it's UFO? That's too strong. We don't know. You and I don't know, but do you suspect it's UFO related?
I mean, it's not impossible that it's related. The thing about it that makes me think he's alive is that he left, his phone was left behind. All electronics that could be traced to him, he didn't have with him. So mainly his phone. So if you are leaving, the whole thing, he was gone within an hour, and that was it. He was just gone. I think there was one sweatshirt, an Air Force sweatshirt, that was found a mile from his home, but I don't think that was even confirmed to be his. So This is one of those David Paulides 411 cases, which I also find utterly fascinating. David does great work on that. And this almost seems like one of those where McCasland just disappears. But I do suspect he's alive.
One of the frustrations of the McCasland story for me is I feel like we're probably never going to know. that it's just one of those things we're not going to know. And what bothers me about that, Rich, from a historical point of view, is that's how we feel about James Forrestal, right? That's how we feel about James McDonald. That's how we feel about Congressman Stephen Schmidt, who all of these people died in the theory. Schiff, excuse me. Yep. I'm going to do a pickup. That's how we feel about Congressman Stephen Schiff,
who died, who just led the Roswell charge in the 1990s.
Yeah, and got a fast-acting skin cancer that took him out in a year.
That's right.
That's right. And so, but where are we left with those stories? Well, we don't know if that's really what happened. Some people say it. I guess we'll never know. And it's just one of those awful things. It's like, if these people died for the secret, then that should be known because it's important and it tells us something about the secret. If they didn't, that should be known because then that would allow us to say, okay, not everything is a dark conspiracy on this thing. Sometimes people just meet untimely ends, and that can happen. So I kind of think he's going to go in the pantheon of Schiff and Forrestal and McDonald. And that's a tragedy for history.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope that he actually turns up alive and well and starts to talk.
Well, so do I, of course.
By the way, regarding Stephen Schiff, I will just say I'm friends with one gentleman who I never knew Stephen Schiff personally, but I have a friend who did know Stephen Schiff at least reasonably well, quite well, I would say, and was 1,000% convinced, absolutely convinced that Schiff was murdered.
Well,
was given a rapid acting skin cancer.
I share that opinion. I have the book Witness to Roswell by Don Schmidt, not Schiff, Don Schmidt, and his partner
Tom Carey.
Tom Carey, and I have it under option. And I have a film project that's finished. The script is finished, called Unidentified, and it has Schiff as a character. Schiff is a main character in this movie story. I do think he was a little too outspoken on this topic. He was a bulldog, and we're talking about congressional hearings. Now they seem almost like, well, let's have another hearing. No, hearings were very difficult, and when Schiff was trying to have hearings in the mid 90s, he wasn't getting a lot of support for it. He was definitely trying to push that rock uphill, and it wasn't going very easy.
His great sin is that he was trying to do his job. So constituents came to him and said, look, there's all this talk about Roswell. The Air Force is denying that anything happened, but you've got all of this witness testimony that in the early 90s was kind of exploding all over the place. Like all of these, like you had Stanton Friedman and Don Schmidt and Kevin Randall, like writing books about Roswell and dredging up these witnesses who were like really good and making a good case. And so Schiff gets wind of this, and he's like, yeah, I will look into this. So he uses the Congressional General Accounting Office of Congress, which is like their investigative body. He says, will you look into this? And they did. And the obstruction they got from the Air Force was legendary. One Air Force liaison literally told, I think, one of Schiff or Schiff's staffer, go shit in your hat. Like something to say. But like they were absolutely never cooperating. And I think Schiff, I don't think he expected the Pentagon just to roll over for him, but I get the impression he was a bit taken aback at just how much they opposed him. And then, of course, that prompted the Pentagon to get ahead of the whole game. And that prompted them to put out their two Roswell explanations, the Mogul balloon in 1994. And then a couple of years later, 3 years later, the test drop dummies. They said, well, people just got all these things confused. There was no UFO crash,
which is the
ridiculous explanation.
You can just, I always look at, or I've come to believe, this is the way to look at Roswell. In 1947, Roswell is a crime scene. In the 90s, when Stanton Friedman and Don Schmidt were sort of competing to tell the story, and they were, as Don Schmidt always said, racing the Undertaker, I see that time period as a cold case. Roswell is the ultimate cold case. And I wonder, and certainly this is what our movie is about, if the next couple of years, as we start to sift through some of this stuff in sometimes open hearings, but probably closed door hearings, if Roswell is becoming a murder investigation. And that's kind of what the movie that I've been working on is about, not because I think it's just fanciful, because I think it's also true. So crime scene to cold case to murder investigation. And boy, what a story that'll be. Okay.
I remember reading, you did a screenplay that I'm sure I still have it.
Yeah.
It was actually really good, and it was kind of funny in times. The best part was Stan Friedman taking a bath in your screenplay, and he's smoking a cigar in the bathtub. He's got a bubble bath, and he's got his papers in the bathtub, and his food coming down his beard, I think. While I was reading, I was just praying, don't stand up, don't stand up.
I let Stan read that script at one point, which was probably something I shouldn't have done. And he said, wow, that's strong stuff. And I said, Stan, you have to look at it this way. That character that's called Stan Friedman is 180% of you. He is not just you. He's a big movie character version of you. But it was funny. And
I enjoyed that.
I wouldn't tell this story ordinarily, and I mean it out of love. I really came to love Stan. I thought he was a great guy. One of the first times I met him at an airport, and my son was with me. And so we went out to have a dinner near the airport to talk. And Stan got a Cobb salad. I shouldn't even be. Well, I have to tell it now. Stan gets a Cobb salad, right? And he gets a piece of the Cobb salad in his beard. Because remember, he had that big old beard, and that was vintage Stan. And as you have a beard, I have a beard. You know what this is like. So a piece of the Cobb salad is in his beard. And I kept sort of scratching my beard, thinking he would get the idea.
Oh, no, you got to be a little more direct with Stan on it.
Right. And finally he goes, is there something wrong with your beard? And and I said, no, Stan, I think you got a little bit of Cobb salad there. And my son has never forgotten this. Stan picks the Cobb salad out of his beard and eats it. That's Stan. That's awesome. And I just thought, because what really happened with Stan and Don is they competed bitterly. I mean, they would publish articles about the other guy's research, just criticizing it. And then for a short period of time, in order to qualify for some funding, they were asked to work together. So I always thought that's the odd couple, because we know Don Schmidt. He's a guy that wears a good looking suit and has his beard trimmed, and he's publicly acceptable. And Stan was kind of the mad scientist type. And I always thought that's a movie, those two guys on the road together. Anyway, that's very funny to think.
Yeah. I remember that well.
Hey, listen, the one thing I want to get in before we call it a day of any kind.
One of two possibilities here, I know.
Okay.
Is it going to be Middle Eastern UFOs? Are we going to talk about whether or not the current events in the world will heighten or diminish the chances for disclosure?
That's it. I mean, we should. And the sort of the corollary or the subsidiary to that one is Trump going to get to be the disclosure president? Will he be
I think I would like to explore this with you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. You go first. I'll follow in.
Okay, well, I suspect that we may have a different perspective on this. So you have, if I may say, I think this is a fair statement, always been a little more of an optimist than I am on the likelihood of disclosure happening. And I don't want to say that I'm always a pessimist on it, but I guess I should say I'm usually a pessimist about it. So I think now that we have a serious global crisis on our hands with this war in Iran, that I am personally, I'm just going to say this here one time, convinced is going to go very, very poorly for the Western U.S. and Israel. I do not think this was a wise choice. I'm just going to leave it there. But I would say, arguing against disclosure, the war itself is absorbing all kinds of bandwidth, first of all. So, we have a serious, major civilizational crisis growing around the Strait of Hormuz. And when you, in a live crisis, I just don't see the state volunteering some destabilizing truth unrelated to the immediate war aims. That's one thing. But secondly, for disclosure to happen, like you need more than just documents. You've got to have public attention. You need to have some level of like bureaucratic coordination, and mostly, I would say, maybe not mostly, but also a public environment capable of absorbing the information. And I think right now those conditions are weak. I mean, you have the official posture at Arrow, which is totally procedural and very limited. It's all just procedural. I don't really see anything going on there. I think the public materials from that office are still, they're talking about their annual reports and their hearings, and there's really no new disclosure architecture coming out of there. But then the last thing is that the war itself, I think, really strengthens the hand of the very parts of government least inclined toward openness. You got this major conflict. So you have intelligence community, you have military, all the executive actors. I think this is all about more secrecy, not less. So I think classification becomes easier for them to defend. The whole sources and methods argument becomes easier for them to make and harder for people to challenge. And and then anything tied to like airspace incursions or censored data or anything like that, strategic platforms, and everything else, all the advanced surveillance and all of that stuff, that just gets folded, I think, very tightly into the whole national security box. So I think, a conflict with Iran, especially one touching Hormuz, gives every secrecy-oriented office just a fresh reason to say, not now. So I don't see it happening. And I suspect you'll have another perspective on this as to why Trump might want to push a disclosure card, and I want to hear you say that. But I think for me, the basic argument is that the war narrows the aperture. It concentrates power. It gives secrecy more privilege, and I think it tends to push anomalous information back under national security control.
Well, it'd be hard to argue with that. I mean, clearly that's true. So
I'll say one caveat, and then I'll give this up to you.
Cut you off.
It is, whereas I don't see a good motivation for the government or government agencies to promote a disclosure, I would leave open a possibility that in a crisis such as what we are now looking at globally, that something might shake loose that is beyond executive control, beyond presidential control, that might force a question or force an issue. That I leave open as a possibility, but I don't think that would lead to disclosure anyway. I think there's too much control, there's too much media consolidation, and alternative media like us, we're out there, but I think the legacy media is still, it's our version of Pravda. It is the official truth.
That's okay, my friend. I'm going to quote you back to yourself, though. I remember back during writing AD After Disclosure. And by the way, that was one of my favorite things, having these kind of conversations. If we were smart back then, if there were a podcast back then, we'd have recorded all our sessions where behind the scenes of the book, and we'd have made that happen too. Excuse me.
That's absolutely true what you say.
I mean, because they were so fascinating. And there, if you look at the book as X amount of information, you'd have to look at the discussions that led to the book as 10X. And that would have been fascinating. The one thing I'm going to quote back to you, though, of your own thinking was one of the things that you always said was instability in the body politic actually creates conditions that might make disclosure more likely. Yes. Am I quoting you right on that?
That's correct. And that's why I gave my little caveat at the end. I do leave open the possibility that something in a time of crisis, and if U.S. governmental instability really becomes an issue, which I'm not necessarily seeing that in the immediate future, but if it were, then I think I might change my opinion.
Okay, well, look, I'm gonna go in another direction here on this topic, and when it comes to is disclosure more or less likely? I'm not sure exactly where to come down on it, but I will say this: it's not impossible. It is just not impossible right now. Donald Trump, for example, might want a distraction. I mean, he's got three things going on: Iran, Epstein, and ICE, right? Yep. And a little disclosure of non-human intelligence would certainly take all of them, even Iran, off the page for a few days. The other thing that obviously Trump cares about is he might want that historical significance and distinction that comes from whoever gets to actually make this statement on their watch. And we know that he cares about that because disclosure—
Dude wants a Nobel Prize.
Yeah. I mean, disclosure of a non-human intelligence is better than putting your face on a gold coin. It's better than putting your name on the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. I mean, it's just, it's the winner. It's like, take your chips and go home. You've done it. So I just want to, here's my take at this point. I think we have to get used to the idea in 2026 that it is now at least a credible scenario, if not likely, it's at least credible to imagine Donald Trump as the disclosure president. And I lay awake at night and think about that sometimes.
I don't think he's an independent actor.
Okay.
So I really don't. I think a guy like Trump, I mean, you think about him. So 10, 11 years ago, he really hits the political scene as really like the ultimate outsider, you know? I mean, keep in mind, not only the Democratic Party hated him, the Republican Party hated him. They wanted nothing to do with him. And in 2015, 2016, he just wiped the floor with all the other Republican candidates. So they were forced to accept him as their nominee. They didn't want him. The establishment wanted nothing to do with him. So he seemed like, yeah, I mean, egomaniac, check, but that could work in his favor. Like if you're going up against the system, you've got to have got to have a strong ego. I mean, let's just get real about it. And you could see that this, in theory at least, could be the guy who would do disclosure. Like I often entertain that idea as well. But what I think, you know, 4 years of his first term, and now we're into his second year of his second term. I think what history has shown is that the U.S. national security system can absorb anything. They can absorb Donald Trump, and they did absorb Donald Trump. He has no leeway. When Joe Biden was president, I don't think anyone really thought Biden was making any of the decisions either. He wasn't. Well, Trump's in there. He's a much more forceful personality, but I don't think many people think that he's really got the leeway or ability to make these decisions. If he was going to do a disclosure, he can't just do it with a tweet on Truth Social. It's just not going to work. No one will believe it. He made a totally false statement the other day that he was in negotiation with the Iranian government, and everyone knows that's complete BS.
Yeah.
So his credibility, honestly, has just. I mean, first of all, half the country already had no credibility for him anyway, but he's lost it with the other most of the other half, I think. So for him to, he would have to have.
Rich, we are going to get mail now. The mail.
He would have to have institutional support.
The mail's coming in. Yeah. Well,
and I don't think he would get institutional support.
Well, I take your point that a tweet or a post about disclosure is not quite the formal disclosure we might have imagined from a president when we were writing that book. And I am going to offer no opinion about whether it would be taken credibly or not. The one thing that I think you could say is that he has, you mentioned it. I mean, I'm using your own thing. He has the ego to do it. He has the, which would be the desire for historical relevancy. He's shown that he doesn't mind creating a diversion. So he possibly could do that. But the other thing he's sort of shown is that, you know what, he's just willing to say things in the moment. Quite often you see this guy living in the moment, right? And in the moment, he's got at least one and maybe both of his sons, you know, in his ear saying, you got to do this, Dad. He's got people on his administration, from Marco Rubio to the what's his face, who's the head of the CIA, who are saying, who have been, Ratcliffe, who's very outspoken on it. And then there's a lot of Republicans that he likes in Congress who are talking about it. From, we know those names. We've talked about them many times. Yeah. I'm just saying so I guess I'm not saying I predict it. I'm not saying that I expect it. I'm just saying it's credible, because here's the thing, Rich. Let's say that let's just do low-tech disclosure. He's awake in the middle of the night and he's on Truth Social, and he puts the cap lock on, and types, "They're real. The aliens are coming, and I know all about it." And his last statement is, "Thank you very much for your attention, President Donald J. Trump."
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, that's not the same as showing us the Roswell crash or introducing us to a non-human intelligence, to our faces, but it would get covered. And then the question becomes, maybe he doesn't bring the evidence forward immediately, but it could be under that scenario that other people would. In other words, a lot of people are taking his promise to sort of declassify a bunch of documents. I don't think they think Trump is trying to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth about UFOs. They think that was a political act, but they're still happy to see it, right? So it's possible. What did you and I say in our book? We said disclosure was impossible but inevitable. That is our quote, right? And I've never forgotten that, because I still believe it today. It still feels impossible, and yet the more you know on this topic, Rich, the more you feel like how can it stay hidden forever?
The conversation's not going away. That is true. What I think we're seeing is a kind of hardening of the two sides. One thing on the pro-disclosure side of it, let's say our side of it, and probably the side that most listeners and viewers has gotten much, much stronger in the last decade. This is now a public conversation on many levels, and the number of people on YouTube and podcasters has kind of exploded, and some really excellent voices have come forward. So there's a much broader conversation about this, and that's, I think, a very good thing, and that's not likely to stop. Right. On the other hand, the other side of it, the actual secrecy side, I think people, they get a little bit confused. They think the government's trying to do some kind of fake disclosure, and I think that's not true. They see people like Luis Elizondo or Chris Mellon, people with government connections, Al Puthoff, he's talked a little bit, Eric Davis, and they think, oh, well, the government's disclosing now. There must be something fake about it. And I've never really believed that. I think that what we're seeing within the U.S. government in this incredibly complex labyrinth that has competing interests everywhere you look is that there is an openness faction that has always existed. An openness faction existed in the 1950s and 60s. It was there. It was military people who believed in that, incidentally.
Yeah.
And so there's always been a core of dissenters within the national security community. And I really think that is what we have been seeing. So on the other side of it, you still have the secrecy group really circling the wagons and doing every single thing possible. I mean, they put out a couple of hit pieces in, was it the Wall Street Journal last summer? And it was all in order to intimidate members of Congress against passing the UAP Disclosure Act, in my opinion. So there's a tremendous amount of a lack of willingness to move on the other side of it that has not changed. And so how that it is truly the story of the irresistible force against the immovable object. That is what we're looking at. And at some point, I agree that there will be a break. There'll be a breakthrough. I don't see it. I don't think that this current war is going to help the cause unless unless we see, like, this is going to be a world historical transformative war, in my opinion. I think it's likely to do that. And I think it is likely to transform the structure of power in our world globally, and will probably accelerate the decline of things like the petrodollar system and just U.S. hegemony in general. And I do think, not right now, but in the long run, it will cause a lot of the Gulf states perhaps to rethink their alliance with the United States.
Would you then say if it decreases U.S., primacy over international politics a little bit, does that create an opening of some kind for other countries to step forward?
Oh, not other countries. Well, maybe, but probably not. But within the U.S., I could see, whistleblower factions, unwelcome leaks of information coming out, that sort of thing.
But Rich, if you were another country or an adversary, say, of the United States, you'd say the United States has had a free ride for 75 to 80 years where they get to be the guys that sort of lead the chorus on what we're going to say and what we're not going to say. And they've been saying, let's keep it secret for all this time. And we've all kind of gone along with it. But it would certainly be a disruptive thing to United States power for an adversary to say, this stuff is real. We know about it. And by God, the United States has known about it for a good long time. And they have all kinds of information about it. And it's time for the world to demand the United States to fess up about what they know, which would be very disruptive to a reverse engineering program, potentially. Is that possible?
The question would be which country? So not China.
Yeah.
Definitely not China. 25 years ago, 26, 27 years ago, China did a massive crackdown against the Falun Gong movement, which was in part, it was a spiritual kind of Tai Chi movement, but it was also a UFO oriented movement. They talked about aliens. And the Falun Gong, what became during the 1990s, I think more popular than the Communist Party of China.
I remember this because I remember we were writing on top of each other when we were doing the book, and we trade chapters. And I remember reading that reference, and that's kind of an interesting. So, okay, the
Chinese government will, in my opinion, will never. They will never allow a disclosure movement to come up because that's too much of that is an absolute threat to their authority. And that is why the Falun Gong had to be taken down in 1999. And it was brutal. And so the way they did that. But it was like the Falun Gong really represented a kind of alternative authority that was independent of the Communist Party of China. And so I just think that ruling establishment, there is no way in hell they're going to allow a kind of political disclosure movement to arise or to promote that sort of thing. I absolutely believe the Chinese military is very highly sophisticated when it comes to managing UFO data. There's no question in my mind about that. But I don't think that they are in any way willing to rock the boat on that. And in the case of Russia, Russia's kind of a little more interesting because what some people don't realize about Vladimir Putin is that he is a great admirer of Yuri Andropov, who was one of the last secretary generals of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
led the Soviet Union shortly before Gorbachev, between Brezhnev and then there was Chernenko and then Gorby. And Andropov was very interested in UFOs. As far as
I did not know that. Okay, yeah. That's interesting.
Very much so. And Putin was like a young KGB officer back in those days when Andropov was head of the KGB before he became head of the country. And I know that Putin, I think he has possession of Andropov's papers. And I think that's very important for him. So I strongly suspect Putin he knows everything there is to know about this subject. There is no doubt in my mind. But he is such a careful player. He is an absolutely skilled politician and statesman. And the one thing I think he does not want to do ever, like he is all about stability in his country, and he is all about maintaining stability. And he knows as well as anyone, this is an incredibly destabilizing topic.
Well, that's where
I don't see him. Yeah, so there's him. You got him and Xi and China, and so who else? Brazil, India. I don't really see them doing it.
I remember us
Certainly
playing.
Not the European Union.
I mean, so again, we come down to where we even came with the book, which was if it's just what's on the table right now, it doesn't seem likely anytime soon. But then there are things that get put on the table that you don't see coming. And those are the ones that create a lack of stability. And clearly we live in a time that's most of my life has been lived under something that's very not stable about the world environment. It's not getting more stable. So who knows? Eventually this will happen. Anyway, we've exceeded our time limit. It's time for us to say goodbye and get off the air. We had things that we were going to do. We were going to talk about.
The network has another show coming on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we got to get off.
I'll say this about disclosure.
Yeah,
I think it will always be impossible until it happens. I think we wrote that in the book too.
Yeah. So listen, we do live in interesting times. I'm as charged up as I've ever been to find out what is really going on. I do find it a little daunting, and I'm sure you do too. I wake up every day and go, how can I even keep up with all this? It's just too much. It's a fire hose of information, and I don't know how to deal with it some days.
I hear you, man.
I mean,
I get to the later part of every day. I don't mind saying this. I cut everything loud and jangly out of my world. I don't want new. Well, lately I've been watching some news in the evening, but I got to stop that. Usually, like when it gets dark, I'm done, and I want to just quiet. I don't take calls. I don't deal with anyone. It's just me and Tracy, and I just need you. Everyone, you have to find your sanctuary, whatever that is, because it's very easy to lose it.
I hear you on that. I mean, Jackie and I often, we don't do work at night. We work really hard during the day, but then at night we sort of retire to the media room and watch TV. Partly you may not do that, but because I work in the business and have so many friends in the business, I just try to stay up on, what the programs and movies and those things are. And that's actually kind of fun, and it kind of blows off some steam. And then I wake up in the morning and I'll go to like X or something and go, holy crap, when did all this happen? And then it begins again. So we'll be back doing this again. And we were all over the place today. I kind of like that. That was fun. And we'll see if we got any of this right. And we'll talk to each other and to everybody else in a month. Nice to see you.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
A good greeting to everyone watching. Catch you again soon.
Need to Know is produced by Bryce, Zabel, and Tyler Stevens and is brought to you by Stellar Productions. You can learn more at needtoknow.today. We appreciate you and hope you'll spread the word. See you next time, because these days you really do need to know.